I actually almost quit when I was
Wow.
12 because here's the thing about lacrosse. And I tell this to our investors, I tell this to partners that inquire, like, will there ever be lacrosse participation at the level of soccer or basketball in America? And the answer is no. And there won't be participation for golf or hockey at that level. It's a super technical game. The number one reason why kids stop playing lacrosse is it's too difficult. I actually think, as members of the media, which we all are, we come up short sometimes on appropriately and properly articulating how challenging of a skill it is, which should elevate the professionals because they're so incredibly talented. It's obviously like hand-eye sport, stickball. The pros are able to move at their fastest pace, absorb contact, and get the ball off their hip with either hand to an open teammate as soon as they see it. And that takes a long time. I wasn't down for that game. I'm not here to get embarrassed. I'm developed. I'm a pretty good athlete, and I can't catch this ball. Mom, I'm done. And she actually kept driving me to practice, taught me about commitment. And then a year and a half in, I started being able to catch the ball and throw and shoot. And I stuck around. I mentioned 15 my freshman year, and I had a letter jacket as a freshman. And I was like, hell yeah, this is cool. And I put some balls in the back of the net and turn to my parents and go, I think I can play in college.
The Field Talk podcast is presented by Roback. For those of you that have ever seen me somewhere with apparel on, it's probably Roback, head to toe. They've got all the best gear with the best fit and the best feel. Right now, rocking one of the t-shirts, but I'm often in one of the hoodies when it cools down here in Connecticut for the fall and eventually the winter. They've got hats, they've got polos, they've got Q-zips, joggers, pants, shorts, you name it. Roback probably has it. And for those that have not yet ordered off of roback.com, that's RHOBACK.com, you can enter my name, Field, F-I-E-L-D, for 20% off your first order. For those that have followed the game of lacrosse closely for much of the past 20 years, you may know Paul Rabil as one of the best players that steps on a collegiate or professional lacrosse field. Rabil was a standout at Johns Hopkins, was a national champion, multi-time All-American, and considered by many the best player in the sport during the apex of his playing career, which extended into Major League Lacrosse. It turns out Rabil's impact on the sport goes way, way beyond just when he had the cleats on the field. As Rabil is the founder of the Premier Lacrosse League, and on today's Field Talk podcast, we're going to talk about where his vision from a sport that he grew up playing and loving could become his passion and his mission in life, to continue to grow the world of lacrosse, doing so at the professional level. Here's Paul Rabil. It is awesome to be joined now by Paul Rabil. Let's start here. How are you, man?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for coming on today, and congrats on yet another season of the Premier Lacrosse League. We'll talk about that throughout the show as the 2025 season is rolling along. But I want to start by looking backwards here. You grew up in Maryland. In Maryland, they say the crab cakes and football is what you do, but I think lacrosse is not far behind.
I
What was
love
your
that.
childhood? Yeah,
No, it's primal. It's primal. Crab cakes and lacrosse. Lacrosse was Maryland's sole state sport for a number of years. Now it's the team sport of Maryland, because I think jousting is the individual sport. Somehow there was a debate amongst local municipality leaders, but lacrosse has a birthplace, rightfully so, in especially at the collegiate side, with Johns Hopkins University starting it in the late 1800s and then trickling it down to the high school and youth programs. Lacrosse is a Native American game, so its proper birthplace is with the Haudenosaunee people of the Six Nations, which is nearby today, New York. So if you think about, I'm jumping the shark on any question you're about to ask me, Field. It's like, lacrosse's hotbeds are New York and Maryland. And obviously I'm from Maryland, so people think, oh yeah, of course, that's why you play lacrosse. But really inside of it, it's Long Island and Baltimore. Kids who grew up in Manhattan aren't like being thrown lacrosse sticks. And for me, growing up in Montgomery Village, Maryland, the same could be said. There was no like private school lacrosse. Public schools in the area didn't have JV or freshman programs. It was trial and error in the 90s. And we were an hour away from Baltimore. So lacrosse felt, hours and hours and hours away. I actually didn't know what the game was. My neighbor gave me his backup stick. And I was actually playing AAU hoops at the time in club soccer, and both of my coaches wanted me to commit year round, sort of what we've seen happen in youth sports today more regularly. And I wanted to keep playing both, and that opened up a spring sport. And so I began my lacrosse career.
And so what age is that? Is that like 8
I was
years old,
12.
or are we talk 12? Okay, so close to high school. So you pick up a
Yeah.
lacrosse stick for close to the first time around age 12?
Yeah. And I hate being one of those old timers or like, I started playing when I was 12. So anyone can make it. I mean, there's like a objectivity around the sooner you start a game, the earlier you can acquire a skill. There's also, an objective point of view that you can burn out if you like singularly focus on a sport as a young kid versus getting range. And it's my belief that, and I'll get to recruiting, it's my belief that if you play multiple sports, it's a better long-term investment because you access range of dexterity. You're in different locker rooms, learning different schemes, meeting different players, learning different motor skills, developing your athleticism more holistically. And the long term is that if you end up playing college ball or pro ball at some point, you're going to get better and better and better. You're not going to hit a ceiling. The short term gains are what we see a lot of families battle with today is like, okay, well, if I play lacrosse year round, I'm going to hypothetically develop more skill because I'm playing the game more, and that'll allow me to get recruited. But that carries me to recruiting as the NCAA has done a pretty good job regulating for lacrosse, where you used to be able to recruit eighth graders. Now you cannot send an offer until your junior season. So the 12-year-olds out there picking up a stick for the first time like me, they're safe. They can they can develop skill on a reasonable timeline and get recruited and play in college.
So, baby Gronk, if you're out there right now watching, your scholarship offer will come in time to probably like half the SEC football programs, but let's just wait until you're a little bit older there. So, you're 12 when you pick up a stick. We're close to it, close to 12 years old when you pick up a stick for the first time. When did you realize that you were good at lacrosse and maybe loved it as much as any other sport you had played previously?
Not until I was 15. I actually almost quit when I was
Wow.
12, because here's the thing about lacrosse, and I tell this to our investors, I tell this to partners that inquire, like, will there ever be lacrosse participation at the level of soccer or basketball in America? And the answer is no. And there won't be participation for golf or hockey at that level. It's a super technical game. And the number one reason why kids stop playing lacrosse is it's too difficult. I actually think as members of the media, which we all are, like, we come up short sometimes on appropriately and properly articulating how challenging of a skill it is, which should elevate the professionals because they're so incredibly talented. I mean, it's obviously like hand-eye sport, stickball, which is difficult out of the gates. There's equipment that's required, which I mentioned basketball and soccer. You don't have to have equipment, so participation is higher. I didn't mention American football, which had high participation when we were growing up in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And that was publicly funded, right? Like famously, Nelson Mandela has said that sport has the power to change the world. And it's the ultimate equalizer, but only when I think access is equal. And so football went that route because a few presidents in the 1900s really enjoyed it. And so they pushed down their local senators, mayors, and city council members to allow us to get our pads for free when we signed up for Pee Wee football. So those are some barriers. But going back to the skill of the game and me, I was athletic. I was playing high level basketball and soccer for my age, but I couldn't keep up with my stick. And the thing is about lacrosse, I liken it to, the best point guards in the NBA. They can make a pass with either hand off their hip when they see it become available. In lacrosse, if you're not skilled with your stick, you're just going to slow down. And the pros, what's amazing, I know you've been on the sideline, the pros are able to move at their fastest pace, absorb contact, and get the ball off their hip with either hand to an open opponent or open teammate as soon as they see it. And that takes a long time. I wasn't down for that game. I was kind of like, no, I'm not here to get embarrassed. I'm like, I'm developed. I'm a pretty good athlete and I can't catch this ball. Mom, I'm done. And she actually kept driving me to practice, taught me about commitment. And then a year and a half in, I started being able to catch the ball and throw and shoot. and I stuck around. I mentioned 15 my freshman year. I was at a public school called Watkins Mill without that JV or freshman program in Montgomery Village. And because there was only 20 guys who went out for the team, I happened to be one who had played since he was 12. So I started, and I had a letter jacket as a freshman. And I was like, hell yeah, this is cool.
Yeah, that's inspiring.
And I put some balls in the back of the net and turned to my parents and go, I think I can play in college. I was a little bit delusional, but I was up for the work.
Maybe at first. Yeah. So you end up obviously blossoming in a hurry at the high school level. So walk me through the decision. Ends up at Johns Hopkins and Johns Hopkins. Easy enough for me to say. As one of the greatest lacrosse programs in the history of collegiate sports, and obviously a local powerhouse. I'm sure somewhere that you're very familiar with growing up. But I'm sure when you start to rise up the quote unquote recruiting rankings, you're having lots of schools come after you, and you're realizing that maybe lacrosse is something I can do beyond my high school level. What was that process like for you, and how did you end up where you did at the collegiate level?
Yeah. Well, Johnny Hopkins comes to mind. Let's stay on the thread of R-rated comedies, best comedies of all time. You started with Wedding Crashers and Crab Cakes and Football. I think it was, what was the Will Ferrell the twin brother film? But Step Brothers. I think is in Step Brothers where he articulates smoking weed with Johnny Hopkins.
I believe it is. Yes. Or I know. And then of course Tommy Boy, where famously he talks about. No, it was. I think it was Tommy. Was it Tommy Boy? Someone's gonna roast us in the comments on this.
I mean, we're doing the best we can. I don't know. It had an imprint on us. Yeah. I think that, it's a strange thing because people often say John Hopkins, and that makes sense. Who names their son Johns?
Right. Yes.
But his name was Johns. And so it's Johns Hopkins University. The recruiting process was really interesting for me. I wasn't very talented my freshman year. I really worked hard. I transferred to a school called DeMatha, which is lauded for its football and basketball programs. And it's a jock school. I mean, we loved our sport. It's all we did. And then we'd study and do well in class, but ultimately it was like, this is your stepping stone to the next level. And so I started getting recruiting letters when I was a junior and was stunned by it, and went to a couple of invitational events in the summer and fortunately did well. And then the letters turned into calls, turned into, really creative sort of recruiting methods. And it was an extraordinary process. I think about the way that I made a decision, because ultimately Johns Hopkins was like 5th on my list. Huh. And I love the ACC schools because I love sport. My dad went to University of North Carolina. And the good news is like all those sports are top tier academically. And that's often what like kids are, if you have the access to a university and they're offering you a scholarship, you get the luxury of thinking about that type of stuff. And then you go through social life and meeting people. But ultimately for me, where Johns Hopkins kept creeping up is they were the best program in the country. And I wanted to win a championship. And if my time at DeMatha was teaching me anything about how much I cared about sport, how competitive I was, and what I would do to win a game, like, what are we doing this for if not going to school to win? And Hopkins had 4 consecutive number 1 recruiting classes. They had been to the tournament the last 4 years, ranked number 1, and they hadn't won a championship in 18 years. It was the largest drought in program history at the time. And this is the most historic program in college lacrosse.
Yeah.
And so the naysayers were going, you ain't going to play if you commit there. Look at all the recruiting classes. And then also like, what are you talking about? They're not going to win. They're cursed. I took that bet on and started my freshman year and was fortunate to play for, I think, one of the greatest senior classes in way of leadership. And I've been around a lot of great leaders. This team was immaculate in the way that they welcomed the young blood, the way that they sort of empathized, the way that they pushed us in the weight room and on the field, the way that they bridged leadership with coaches, which, we had a badass coach, Dave Petramala. He was like kind of our Bobby Knight or It's like he's a tough dude, but he's
He
also a
is, yeah.
loving dude. And those seniors carried us to a 16-0 season, and we won a national championship and stopped that 18-year drought. And I was 18 or 19 years old at the time, so it was pretty special.
Your 4 years at Hopkins were very, very special, not just on a team level, but a personal level as well. You emerge as one of the stars of college athletics, certainly one of the best lacrosse players on the planet at the time, and really in the history of the sport. But at some point during that time playing college lacrosse, was the seed planted in your mind that one day you wanted to maybe make the growth of lacrosse your passion or one of your pursuits in life beyond just your college playing days?
It's a good question. So if I'm keeping it a buck, I would say that part of what helped me high achieve at college is that I did not look into the future. I was so focused on that team, in that practice, at that ground ball, with that shot, with that upcoming game. And at the time, pro lacrosse, which was Major League Lacrosse, I just started, but wasn't really penetrating its own audience, which was lacrosse players and fans. And they weren't, because they didn't have a network deal, and they weren't marketing well. And I'll be honest, I didn't even think about it. I just wanted to win at Hopkins. There was probably a thought of me that was like, wouldn't it be great to play for Team USA one day? But I was still like, my progression from being introduced to the game to then transferring to DeMatha, I didn't mention, like, there were, I think, 13 players on that team that went to Division I to play lacrosse.
Loaded.
And then I step onto a Hopkins program with all those number one classes of seniors. I was always looking up, and my dad taught me this level of humility and respect. Like, I never viewed myself as the best. I was like, these guys are incredible. I'll be lucky to play with them or against them at some stage. So I was just hyper focused. The seed was planted for me, actually, when I finished my senior year. I was drafted number one to MLL. We had just lost the national championship to Syracuse. You sort of get ripped from your team and your teammates, because as a spring sport, when it ends, especially beyond graduation, they don't extend the dorm period for you. You're out, And so we actually planned a little, like, come down trip to Annapolis, where we could sort of just vent and close the chapter of an amazing 4 years at Hopkins with my former roommates and teammates at Hopkins. And then I sort of carry into about midway point of the MLL season, because they had already started in April. But what changed my point of view on the possibility of professional lacrosse was actually social media.
Huh.
And
How so?
Well, Facebook had launched when we were sophomores in college. And if you guys remember, the only ones who could have a Facebook account was someone with a .edu.
Yeah, college email address. Yep.
And then by the time I was a senior, they had opened it up to high schoolers and non-edu addresses. And then by the time I graduated, they started building what we now know as like fan pages, and, business accounts and all this type of stuff. But a little nuanced thing along the way is they would cap your friends, because we all just had friend pages on Facebook, at 5,000. Whoever thought of that number is arbitrary. It seems really high.
Yeah, it
Like,
does.
yeah, it's just really high. But when I was at Hopkins, my junior and senior year, playing in the national championship game both years, and Facebook had just opened it up to high school, I started getting all these friend requests popping in. And I was like accepting. And then I got to 5,000, and then I would have 10,000 pending. And that taught me a little lesson at the time. The seed that was planted was how important a network partner is.
Yeah.
Because people were watching me on ESPN.
Right.
And then my first year out, I'm drafting, I'm playing summer ball, and I get a call from a buddy of mine who ran an agency. It said, let me work on your Facebook page with you. He converted it to a fan page, and then all those people came in, and I started interacting with them. And remember, pro lacrosse didn't have a network deal, but I was interacting with what I learned were lacrosse players and fans who were interested in pro lacrosse through my sort of funnel and experience that I began to tell them about. And that's when, unknown, but that's when I started developing the instinct of communication and marketing lacrosse and storytelling, which years down the line led to the development of the idea, at least around our media and content strategy, of what professional lacrosse could actually look like.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier you get drafted number 1 overall by the Boston Cannons. Again, like the face of lacrosse is Paul Rabil. You're a draw for that league, but at some point you start to hatch this idea of a new league that might eventually also spell the end of the league that you're currently playing in. So what's that like as you're developing the concepts for Premier Lacrosse that are going to be different than Major League Lacrosse, but also continuing your playing career? Walk me through some of that process, and then what are some of the first steps when you're like, I'm just going to create a sports league that's going to end up becoming very successful? How does that process actually begin?
Yeah. Well, I'll try to, it's a really good question, but I need to like pay some respect to the timeline of like, because there's a lot of discussion now. I see like, what if Caitlin Clark started a new basketball league, or what if LeBron James did, and like all this other stuff. So
Yeah.
so the primary, one of the best pieces of advice, speaking back to Facebook, that I got from my buddy Will Yoder, who is the head of sort of sports at Instagram. At the time, he was at Octagon, that was my agency. And he goes, dude, we can launch your YouTube channel, we can do all this stuff, and it's going to help. But in the end, you have to be the best lacrosse player on the field to reach the potential of audience development, or the best version of yourself. It's like, so never forget that. And I kept the thread of competitiveness and how much I wanted to play at the highest level throughout my first 10 years at Major League Lacrosse. And I didn't have the business acumen to launch a new league. And I didn't really think about it until probably years 7, 8, or 9 in MLO, where I got together with my brother Mike. And in fact, feel like I was looking at building additional income through launching a camp and clinic business. And, I had launched a podcast, and there was this point in time where I had won a couple of MVPs. I'd won a championship. I had launched a foundation, and the momentum and the discussion around lacrosse in America kept going up and up and up. But league attendance and principles of marketing, like getting a network deal and viewership, was going down. So it's sort of like scratching your head. Met with, at the time, UFC, call it UFC and MLS, launching around the same time as Major League Lacrosse. And they were going up and up and up. And they slogged away at it. But you start going, why not us? Now, I say that because the more astute, the better path chosen for an athlete, and take LeBron, which I think, rumors are at that he's at least looking or eyeing to do this into the future.
Yeah.
Is if the league is working, you buy a team. Like team valuations are really high. Like starting a league is a little bit sadistic. Like, it's not something that should be on your list, especially when there's an existing one. So we actually ran the analysis of what team ownership would look like. As I was looking at now in year 7, 8, and 9 of MLL, my next 7, 8, and 9, 10 years in my career. Then we met with MLL about exploring. We had this idea. They were on a commissioner search probably in 2017. We were like, why don't we like disrupt the front office and put together a composite of good minds that can grow the business commercially from an attention perspective and from a player and game experience. And we got rejected. And I understand it. We didn't have experience doing it. And I keep saying we, it's my brother and I. So then the thing is like, once you begin down that path, you learn more and you develop more conviction around the idea. And so we were like, okay, let's put together a group to buy MLL. And if we can't do that, let's put together a group to start a league of our own. And so that was the timeline in a way. I think that what lacrosse had going for it is that it was the tier 1 property of the discipline that was now being played around the world. There were 18 countries that played when I started. Now there's 95.
Wow.
That are sanctioned. And we're now in the Olympics for the first time in 100 years again. Yep. So these macro trends, from boys and girls participation to college, teams that are starting, just kept going, just kept rising, and the pro game was staying flat or declining. So we built a good story, and then we went back to MLL a couple of times. They kept saying good luck, because the challenge of launching a league are tremendous. and we learned that the hard way. But eventually we got out of the gates. And I think if I look back historically, the sort of Achilles heel of a lot of startup leagues is they try to balance the opportunity with risk mitigation. And risk mitigation for an ownership group is to not have long-term deals with players. Because if you want to close shop, you can then close shop. And so all the players in MLL had 1-year deals, which is why we were able to start the PLL with all the players seemingly overnight, even though it wasn't. And if you look at the NBA or the NFL now, even if a league came in to compete, you couldn't get all the players because they're on staggered deals. Some of them have 10-year deals. So there's a lot of nuance there.
So there's a lot of stuff that's maybe nuance as you described it or behind the scenes, and I don't think fans are totally aware of that went into this process. But one of the things anybody who follows lacrosse quickly learned about the PLL that I thought was a brilliant way to help grow the game and grow the popularity of the PLL was basically these city takeovers. Can you describe for those that aren't familiar how you guys do your business from one weekend to the next rather than having teams that, while they do now have city designations, play all of their home games in one city and all of their away games in the respective cities of their opponents that week?
The touring model is different than how fans are used to consuming team sports, which is a home and away model. And your team, the Baltimore Ravens, are playing 8 times at M&T Bank Stadium. And we decided to take our show on the road, which modeled more individual sports leagues like the UFC or golf or tennis. And we did that because the data that was in front of us was that there were only 15 million fans in America, and MLL had tried to do a home and away schedule, and it wasn't working. So are we just these like illuminous operators that can do it better? No. We realized that there weren't enough fans to support a home and away model at that point. And then we also looked at my experience playing college lacrosse in the Final Four, which is essentially a tour concept. 4 of the best teams in the country descend upon a major market city, play at a top tier venue over the course of a weekend, and fans travel in and watch it. There's like a supply demand shift. So we had all these other scenarios. All right, we're going to launch with 8 teams. If we're touring, can we really name our teams in cities, or would that be disingenuous? So we actually launched with our teams without city names.
Yep.
And they would go to one market and play games. Everyone would play once, and they would win or lose. And that would be, their win-loss record for week 1. Then we'd go to the next market, same thing. So the consumption of the win-loss into playoffs was the same. The location was different. And that worked for us to develop fandom more quickly. And the obstacle remained, which was casual fans didn't know how to enter. We could win lacrosse fans, but it was hard to win casual sports fans. But the goal was to win lacrosse fans. Like, launching a new league is totally different than building, flag football or pickleball from scratch. They're the first. We were relaunching. So we had to rebuild. And in my case, I thought most importantly, reintroduce. Another way of saying it is rebrand lacrosse in America. And we've done that. So our next step is going to be, all right, we've got 2 years ago, we announced our 8 teams into cities. So we shifted the touring model to only touring into those cities with the exception of a few neutral sites. Beyond that will be, when do we go home and away? Because the lacrosse fans have grown from 15 million to 48 million, according to the same Luca report. So we've done some good damage. And I think for us to reach our ultimate potential, casual sports fans matter, and reflecting sort of the values of the big 4 matters. And that's what we'll have to get to.
You have mentioned casual sports fans. You also have mentioned on multiple occasions the importance of a network deal. Earlier this summer, you guys did some major news on that front. And how did your network deal, which now, of course, with ESPN and ABC, come to be? And how has that impacted the sport's growth? Because I certainly see a lot more lacrosse on TV now than I did, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, pro sports are becoming, one of the most sought after asset classes of private equity and venture capital. And that's really happened field over the last 5 years. It wasn't even that when we were raising money. So Mike and I could have tried to predict it, but to the degree that sports leagues and teams are this highly sought after, we couldn't have said it with conviction in 2018 when we were raising money. And that's because they're huge companies that oversee big companies in themselves. They're media companies, they're advertising businesses, they're ticketing businesses, they're merchandise businesses, they're youth sports businesses, all sort of wrapped in one, which makes them complex to run. But the number one most important partner is your distribution. Who is your media company that is partnering with you? They used to be network, and as you know, like, they're bigger than networks now.
Yeah.
And for me, ESPN, owned by Disney, presents the best scenario and has historically done it better than anyone else in their ability to develop leagues. Because what they do is they have the NFL and the NBA and the tier one properties that drive their advertising and subscription business and their daily programmings and talk shows. And then they've also, over time, brought the tier two leagues up to the forefront. They developed UFC, they've developed F1, they've developed the WNBA, they developed the NHL at times and MLS at times. And so I wanted to become that next sort of property for them to align with. And the deal that you're referencing is our renewal with them. We did a 4-year deal led by Burke Magnus in 2021. We've just done a new 5-year deal now led by Roz Durant, but it also includes an investment from ESPN into the PLL and WLL, and that's unique, and and to me that demonstrates an evolution of media companies in America, because they realize, that rightfully so, that they are a key partner in the development of a sport. And to hedge a bet, if you're an executive at a media company that's saying, hey, we just helped develop the UFC, pay them now, they're getting now $300 million a year, and they're going to ask for $1 billion a year, and we're a part of that equation, yet we're having to pay the piper more and more. So actually taking an ownership position gives you the upside of your work in developing them, because UFC will still get north of $1 billion. But if ESPN had an ownership position in them, they would be accruing that value on their balance sheet via ownership dividends. So I think, that the business approach was one that we were aware of. And as partners with ESPN and seeing the value, I wanted to present them with that opportunity. And they've been great as a result.
It's been a blast to watch. It's just the perfect summertime sport as well. I love the city takeovers. I love the social content you guys do as well, to kind of give you some behind the scenes of what it's like to be in these various big markets where fandom is starting to grow and grow for the respective teams that now have a city attached to them. If somebody has been in outer space for the last few months here, what are some of the things that they may have missed in 2025 in the sport of lacrosse that have helped sort of drive interest and become the primary storylines of this season?
Well, I think there's micro storylines that have to do with the best part of what we do, which is the game. There's the Denver Outlaws and the New York Atlas that are kings of the West and kings of the East. The Outlaws is a unique storyline because they have our version of 4 Heisman Trophy winners. It's called the Tewaaraton Trophy. And one of the players is Jared Bernhardt, who actually had a stint with the Atlanta Falcons, who was drafted in the PLL, was the best player in college lacrosse. And similar to his, nearby colleague, Pat Spencer, had a second love that they wanted to pursue. Now, different than Pat, who I haven't been able to manage to get back to come to the PLL with his Golden State Warriors run, we were able to manage to get Jared to come back to professional lacrosse, and he's been extraordinary. And there's a lot of discussion around, we started with crab cakes in football, crab cakes in lacrosse. There's an episode on Rabel's Places, a show that we just rolled out with ESPN and Omaha Productions. It's called Turf Wars, where I sit with Bill Belichick and we talk about why the crossover between football and lacrosse is so seamless. Jared's a version of that. But watching a team that has 4 Tewaaraton winners on the field and winning, figuring out with one ball how to share it and how to continue to peak is pretty special. And then New York being a top team in the East, like every sports commissioner wants that. It's just a key market.
Sure.
And they have MVPs in their own right, a Canadian Jeff Teed and then Trevor Baptiste, who's at the stripe. So that's like a really cool week to week storyline and watching them. And I hope, that if they continue to progress, and by the way, I have to say I love all teams.
Yep.
No, but if those two play at Sports Illustrated Stadium on September 14th for the PLL championship right outside of Manhattan, that'll be pretty cool. I think from the business standpoint, we've had some great weeks. We were just in Chicago and we ran a street lacrosse event that was headlined by Lonzo Ball and Taco Fall, right on Michigan. And then we took a boat tour and built the boat into a lacrosse field with one of our tentpole partners, Whirlpool, who's headquartered in Chicago. And then, we sold out Northwestern University and had our 8 teams play 4 games. And it was really cool to see an emerging market like Chicago in the Midwest demonstrate their appetite for having a team of their own. So that's been a highlight for me. And then next year we start our next ESPN deal. So I'm thinking about how we want to evolve our broadcast and make it more consumable for someone who doesn't know lacrosse, which is seamless sort of education through visual graphics, taking the camera angles differently so that people can track a ball, problem solving, but ultimately trying to achieve, growth from that now 48 million lacrosse fans to 100 million in America.
It's been awesome to see. As a former lacrosse player myself, with not nearly your credentials, I thought there was a time where lacrosse was only ever going to be played, like you said, Long Island, Maryland, Massachusetts, where I'm from, and a couple of other spots. But you have made it a game that is seen all over the United States, and it's very cool. It's been awesome to track the PLL's growth, and obviously you are the driving force behind that. We really appreciate joining us today, Paul. It's been awesome to see, and best of luck. You don't need it, but continued success with the PLL going forward.
It takes a village, man, and being on a show like yours and having a relationship with ESPN like we do, and having extraordinary talent that's committed to improving their skill. I mean, I was like you, Field. I was like, I don't know that this ever becomes a pro game at the level that lacrosse players I'd always dreamed of. And what you learn is when you create that opportunity that, man, we only see a college athlete at its best is only here. When they get pro opportunity, man, what Kevin Durant has done since winning a championship as a freshman at Texas, and it's just seeing that happen. And we're still only in the early stages. I think lacrosse from a skill standpoint, you'll see behind the backs, like a dribbler in basketball going behind the back seamlessly. We're already seeing passes and shots happen more regularly. The potential is endless. And I'm just really pleased to be along for the ride.
It's great stuff, man. I can't wait to continue to follow it along, and we'll be in touch soon, I'm sure.
Look forward to it. Thanks, guys.
Great stuff there with Paul Rabil, who I can't decide if he is a better lacrosse player or entrepreneur. The bottom line is he's got kind of that everything he touches turns to gold mentality to the way that he approaches life. And I got to be honest with you, as someone who grew up playing lacrosse and somebody who watched Paul Rabil play in those national championship games at Johns Hopkins, it is amazing to see how far the sport has come. A big thank you, of course, to Roback for making the Field Talk podcast happen. If you have not yet, head on over to roback.com, RHOBACK.com. All of the greatest gear, best fit, best feel, head to toe stuff. I'm obsessed with not just the t-shirts, the polos, and definitely the hoodies when it cools off, which hopefully isn't for several months up here in the Northeast. Enter my name, Field, F-I-E-L-D, for 20% off your first order. And finally, if you found us here on YouTube, make sure to hit that subscribe button. A big thanks to all those that have already done so. And if you're listening on a podcast somewhere, whatever platform you're using, ratings, reviews, subscriptions help us in a big way. Until next time, we'll talk to you all again soon.